I'm Chris Grandison. Welcome to my channel, Xenogenesis, where I apply evolutionary psychology to Black community issues. Before we get into today's topic on how height can be a blessing or a curse for Black men, there have been many requests in the comments regarding white supremacy. The white supremacy lecture is coming up next month. Now, around 100 of you bought my book this week, so for those of you who can't wait, it's okay to skip ahead to the White Supremacy Matrix chapter. That is chapter 12. And then when I give the lecture, you'll be prepared with all your great questions from having already learned about white supremacy from an evolutionary perspective. And thanks a lot to all of you who decided to go ahead and read the book. Looking forward to your feedback about what you're learning from it. Now, here is a preview from the White Supremacy lecture that I call a warning from history about how populations can respond to demographic changes they find threatening to their tribe when they are the tribe that is in demographic decline. It's something Black people need to keep in mind with regard to all this demographic decline that is taking place. And some populations and countries, I believe they're going to get desperate and maybe do some very harmful things to people. And of course, if that's going to happen, certainly Black people need to keep their head on a swivel because you know how they feel about us, and we are not the population that's in demographic decline. In fact, the Black population is the fastest growing population on Earth. So here is a little preview of the White Supremacy Matrix lecture coming up next month. Now this is an interesting slide. Ethnic bioweapons that target and kill specific groups or races are scientifically possible. And we found out that in the 1980s, apartheid South Africa was trying to do this. So this is from chapter 4 in my book. A US Air Force Academy study on how South Africa responded to this demographic certainty stated, and we need to pay attention to that word demographic, because that's a big problem now for many modern nations in terms of producing enough children. And then if other populations are producing lots of children and they don't look like your children, people start to be concerned, and that's when they can do very desperate things. And this is what South Africa was planning to do. So here in this US Air Force Academy study, fears of a black tidal wave drove white scientists to try to develop a variety of means that could ensure the survival of white South Africa. In the 1980s, the South African biological warfare program called Project Coast tried to create biological weapons, a black bomb bacteria or other biological agents that would kill or weaken Black people and not white people. The black bomb could be used to wipe out or incapacitate an entire area, and all of this was driven by the demographic threat that Black South Africans were having more children than white South Africans. And it wasn't close. In that chapter, I wrote that, it wasn't Mandela and the ANC that took down apartheid. It was Black women. Black women in South Africa were turning out about 5 or 6 children per woman, and white women were only having a couple. So intelligence agencies like the CIA, years before apartheid came down, they predicted it would come down, not because of political ideology and movements, simply because Black South African women were just turning out so many children. More children, and those children take your culture, so that's more culture, and eventually it will become the dominant culture. Black South African women simply turned out too many warriors to be stopped. So intelligence agencies, the top ones, predicted that, yeah, we don't need to look at anything else. We can just look at how many children Black women are having down there, and apartheid is on the clock. There's no way it's going to be able to survive. So, well done to those South African women. In the previous episode, I quoted evolutionary psychologist Aaron Sell, where he stated evolutionary analyses indicate that one of the key variables governing social interactions in species like humans should be formidability. For instance, a man's height is usually perceived as an attractive trait. Generally speaking, taller guys get better jobs and more girls. Height is one of those physical traits that's associated with, having this formidable profile, and it also has significant influence in sexual romantic relationships. We know it seems to be quite significant in how women choose their mates. On black men, height can simultaneously be a blessing and a curse, and I saw a lot of that talk in the comments section past couple of weeks. Now, when examined by race, a different picture emerges. In an analysis of over 1 million cases from the New York Police Department Stop and Frisk program, it was revealed that the taller a black man is, the more likely he was to be unjustifiably stopped and searched. The tall white men were seen as no more threatening than short white guys. Not so for the tall black guys, and I'm not telling tall black guys anything they don't already know. Tall black guys were seen as more dangerous than short black guys. So the short black guys were not targeted, but the tall men were seen as threats and consequently targeted to be minimized. I don't want you to focus on the injustice of it, how that these men are being unjustifiably stopped. I want you to focus on how it defines the tribal lines. That tall white men do not get this treatment, tall black men do. Again, we're competition and we're being treated like competition because that's how you treat the competition. Very different treatment. The treatment of these men as outgroup and dangerous. This behavior makes clear we are being perceived as fitness suppressors, as rivals and competitors. This is an us versus them relationship, and the study was explicit in stating that the exact same trait is treated very differently on black men than it is on white men. Even though we live in the modern world, our mental adaptations evolved for the Stone Age. And these mental adaptations that detect masculinity and respond to it psychologically, they are built for that time. And the Stone Age was a very dangerous time. And of course, high masculinity was used to do a whole lot of terrible things. Humans have a long history of cannibalism. So that's one of the threats that strong masculinity represented to other men, being chased down and eaten by bigger and stronger men. The mental circuitry we evolved during this long period of evolutionary time is still fully functional in our brains. Not only is it still functional today, but it is programmed with data from contemporary racial values and judgments, also known as racial stereotypes. This is racial data that is now used to influence our behavior and interactions with those of other races in today's world, and it often occurs in a manner that we are not comfortable with. We present a status challenge to them just by existing. That's what you're seeing in that response to tall black men. They're not doing anything, they're just walking down the street. They were unjustifiably stopped and searched. So that shows they weren't doing anything wrong. These are unjustifiable stops. So they're just walking along, minding their business and existing, broadcasting strong black masculinity because they're tall, because they're not doing this to the shorter black guys, or at least they're less likely to do it to the shorter black guys. So we present a status challenge to them just by existing. As I stated in part 3, where submissive behavior by black men was welcome and acceptable, and they were actually rewarded for behaving in a submissive manner, our biology refuses to do that. Unlike our behavior, our biology can't be socially engineered to show deference to whites, like what we saw in the study on the Cleveland Police Department, or on the black man in the business meeting who came in and sat down quickly to reduce his black masculinity to make those white men in the meeting feel comfortable. Blackness is not a sense of threat that we can conceal or eliminate, but as we saw in the study on the Cleveland Police Department, and let's say on the example of the black man in the business meeting, or even the F-22 pilot, we try hard to eliminate black masculinity so as not to be punished for it. Then the same study used 400 men to assess photos of black and white men. Tall white guys were perceived as more competent, intelligent, and attractive. Taller black men were primarily perceived as threatening. Why is an admired and desired physical trait in white men producing a negative emotional response when possessed by black men? These masculine traits are perceived as weapons. So if we perceive in each other as competition, and the outgroup men have height. These masculine traits are perceived as weapons that may provide a competitive advantage when they are possessed by sexual or tribal rivals. Now, these black guys are not sexual rivals. These are the strangers on the street. But they certainly are tribal rivals, and they generate that similarly uncomfortable feeling in men of other tribes. It's the equivalent of being happy your country has a strong military, but being disappointed and concerned when the neighboring country has a strong military, because now that indicates their ability to challenge and compete with you. It seems very easy for humans to accept that men of other tribes are dangerous and difficult for us to unlearn this fear. Our ancestral past has left us with this instinct, this subtle urge when we come across these others who are not like us. There's an instinct to treat them less positively and be quicker and more comfortable to deal with them negatively. So this trait, height, that's perceived positively in white men by other white people, becomes something treated very differently when possessed by black men. Other physical traits that are considered to enhance male formidability, like depth of voice or more than average muscle mass, as we discussed, in the last episode, it will intensify this effect. Black men are pretty much a perfect storm to be perceived like this because we are culturally stereotyped as being aggressive, impulsive, and violent. Tribal senses, matched with racial stereotypes, track black men as being the most physically formidable and consequently something to feel threatened by. Through an evolutionary lens, it's a logical resentment to have. You mistreat them, negatively prejudge them, discriminate against them, and deny them status if possible. That is the correct way, that's the adaptive way to treat black men if you have the power to manage them. Police officers have the power to do that, as do court judges, teachers, and jury members and employers. If we are not tribal rivals, then a black man's height should not be evoking these negative competitive responses from other men. The nature of the response makes clear what our tribal relationship is to each other. The relationship on a population level, it's like the Lakers versus the Celtics. It's like Arsenal versus Tottenham. Positive genetic qualities in our tribal rivals that appear to enhance their physical prowess gets human tribal senses tingling. And in this case, these unconscious instincts result in negative behaviours from police officers towards tall black men. Now, this is where they used 7 different studies, hundreds of participants of the study, and you see it right there. 2 white perceivers, young black men appeared bigger, stronger, and more threatening than white men, even when the white males were the same size as the black males. Now, being the same size, that's not going to be good enough. It's how the body is actually configured. 2 people can both be 6 foot and 210 pounds, but, where are they carrying that weight? Is it across their chest and shoulders, or is it in their stomach? What does their outline look like? Do they have that athletic shape or not? Because we do actually look for that when we assess formidability. But again, this marks black men as that ultimate masculine threat. We don't see white people perceiving any other race of men the way these white perceivers are perceiving these young black men. Our tribal psychology works in tandem with mental adaptations for assessing how tough a man is. These are the formidability assessment mechanisms that I showed you in the last episode. And these adaptations, they operate on groups as a whole, not just on how one individual may assess another. A group of men are not perceived as tough just because they are a group. They will be perceived as a tough crew if the individuals that make up the crew look tough. People can make a distinction in toughness between groups made up of men who looked more or less threatening. Research in 2018 found this effect, that 82% of the participants of the experiment spontaneously identified the more formidable group the first time of asking. So this variation in sensitivity to testosterone between ethnic groups will logically, or should logically, translate into variation in the perception of formidability between ethnic groups. This same effect was found in lab experiments where white participants rated black men, similar in size to white men, as having a greater ability to cause physical damage to people and also needing more physical force to take those black men down. Meaning white men and women rated a group of black men similar in size to a group of white men as being the more physically formidable group. Once our senses register that these masculine cues are linked more strongly with some ethnic groups than with others, it then becomes cultural information that humans associate with individuals based on their group identity. This results in the formation of a pecking order of formidability between groups. So if a group is made up of black men and the mind contains ethnic stereotypes of them from cultural learning, and this ethnic stereotyping is matched with real-world observations made over time of the markers of testosterone being more pronounced in black men, then a group of black men will be perceived as being a tough group, and they will be identified this way in seconds or even fractions of a second. Now, this is one of the top living evolutionary biologists of the 20th and the 21st century. And he had some very interesting comments about African Americans. Now, I like to bring in guys like this, top evolutionary biologists and top geneticists, because I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I am not a geneticist, and I like to stay in my lane. So it's better for me to just take their words and let their words speak for themselves. One of the great thinkers of the 20th century, according to Steven Pinker, and I think that was in Time magazine as well. So if you don't know who Robert Trivers is, go Google him and read what he's done. You can't pick up a book on evolutionary biology, a modern book on evolutionary biology, let's say from the 1980s or 1980s up till now. You're not going to find a book without this man's work repeatedly cited in that book. Every single one of them. This is how influential this guy is. If you've heard of that book, The Selfish Gene, well, it was his work that was being popularized by Richard Dawkins. It was the work of Robert Trivers, his research, that was being popularized in The Selfish Gene. And I think a lot of you would have heard of The Selfish Gene. So now let me get to what Robert Trivers said about Black Americans. The intrinsic benefits of strong outbreeding associated with strong selection has produced a vibrant and powerful subgroup. African Americans are the melting pot populations par excellence in the United States. Genetically, roughly 25% European in origin, 70% African American, and the remainder Amerindian and Chinese. Now, what you're saying is this. So the mixing of majority African DNA with some of the other races and going through the harshness of the enslavement process, surviving it, because this is a process that disproportionately killed people. So if you come out the other side of the slave process, surviving, producing children, and so on, you are strong. So when he said there, strong selection, that's what he's talking about. That for hundreds of years, the enslavement process that black people were going through, all throughout the Americas, North America, the Caribbean, South America, it was strengthening that population for the ones who actually survived and reproduced. And of course, they were reproducing as well with some of the other races that were there. So when you bring other races together, it produces genetically stronger and healthier children. It raises their level of heterozygosity. So you're bringing Amerindian, Chinese, European, along with the already strong African DNA. Now let's look at another thing Robert Trivers said. At the same time, social policies such as the war on drugs amount to a war on lower class African Americans. So he's talking about a cost-inflicting strategy being inflicted upon the Black American population. As I said in part 2, evolutionists are very well aware of these cost-inflicting strategies. That is a common behavior pattern of human tribal groups to try and harm the ability of the other tribe to compete with them. They don't always put names on it, but Robert Trivers decided to put a name on it. So the war on drugs, straight up textbook, cost-inflicting strategy, pounding the African-American black male, because that's who they were really going after. So we see here greatly increasing incarceration rates with destructive effects on their communities. So you want to understand that these are a mix of conscious and unconscious behavioral strategies to attack another tribe that's considered threatening. And you want to go after the outgroup males because it is the males of the other tribes that you're concerned about. They are the physical threat to you. The women of the other tribe are going to be perceived as basically a contested sexual resource. They are not threatening. It is the men you want to target. So he goes on to say, so the racial attack continues. Again, understanding very clearly what this is about. But in the long run, it can only strengthen the biological power of its target. So, like he mentioned with the enslavement process, he's saying because African Americans are being put through all these adverse consequences, this harsh, unstable ecologies that the war on drugs and all the other forms of discrimination they face, these difficulties, they create a stronger people because the people who come out on the other side of this. So don't get me wrong, a lot of people are going to get sick, a lot of people dying. They will, have, shorter lifespans and poorer health outcomes and so on. But the ones who come out of it healthier and surviving and stronger and then reproducing, you're creating a stronger and stronger population over time. That's what's happened. And that's exactly what he meant when he said, through strong selection and outbreeding, they've created a very vibrant and strong population. So these things I'm talking about in these lectures here, it's understandable. It's kind of supposed to happen when you put a population, through this meat grinder like this. The ones who survive it, they're going to be hella strong. Now, if you recall the study from the last episode where white participants were likely to identify deep voices as black male voices, in that same study, participants were asked to watch a video of men walking, but they could only see an outline of the figure walking represented as points of light. They couldn't see the individual in living color, so they couldn't actually identify the race visually. The highly masculine walkers had broader shoulders and narrower hips compared to the other, less masculine walkers. Now, male walkers' upper bodies have a larger lateral sway, and they swayed these shoulders in a more dynamically masculine way than the less masculine walkers. The men found to be walking in a highly masculine manner were more likely to be identified as black males. If they only see point light displays of humans in motion and can't see the race of the speaker or the walker, then something in their prior cultural learning experience is causing them to identify the more masculine cues, such as depths of voice and movement, as belonging to black men. Meaning from their own experiences in real life, their tribal psychology has already associated these high masculine features with what they have recurringly observed on black men. Now, those of you who didn't agree with me in the beginning when I was talking about, being this perfect male outgroup threat, ask yourself this. All you guys in the comments section speaking of your negative social experiences where you were doing nothing threatening, but you showed up and you tended to see a few fear and threat responses from people. Stop thinking of yourself as you normally do for a minute. Think back on those experiences where people responded to you a bit fearfully. Now redefine yourself as that perfect male outgroup threat. Now place yourself back in those encounters where you saw those threat responses from people and ask yourself, do those responses now make sense if you turn yourself into the perfect male outgroup threat?
You got it now. Cheers.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this one here. There's so much material I have on this issue of black masculinity. So you let me know in the comments, how much more of this you want to see. Thanks a lot again to all the new subscribers and all the kind things you've had to say in the comments. Welcome aboard.